Hi, it's Colleen Schmidt from Divination Counseling Service here to present Politics, Just the Facts, Part 2. So we're looking at today putting the two charts together in a biwheel so we can see how they compare to one another. And when we're done with that, we're going to compare them to the Sibley chart. Now, in the case of particularly the Sibley chart, but also in the case of when I put the two together, we're going to have to do the asteroids separately because once you move into what's called a biwheel in this program, we're going to use solar fire because I'm trying to expedite time, we lose our second rim, which is all of our asteroids. So I have my asteroids on paper and we'll go through that. Before I begin this video, I want to say a big thank you, first of all, for you watching this video. Thank you so much for watching. But also a big shout out to all of my subscribers who have helped me continue to build this channel. Thank you so much. Also, if you would, like, share, comment, I'd love to hear from you. And most importantly, if you're not a subscriber, I hope you'll consider becoming one. So with that said, we're going to jump into these charts. The first part of what I'm going to do is a little bit of the connections between the two charts and what that means between the parties. The second thing we're going to do is take each of them, and particularly with regards to asteroids in the dial, and look at how they affect the U.S. Sibley chart and what connections they make to us as Americans. With that said, I do want to point out that I have been studying politics since high school, but this is not about my opinion or my politics. What I want to look at here is just the facts and how each of these parties represent their constituents or what it is they represent to us as a two-party system in the United States government. So with that said, we have a big task ahead of us. I still have yet to age those charts. I do want to age them, and I'm probably going to do them in two separate videos, but release them at the same time so that you can study them at your leisure. Unfortunately, it may take me a couple weeks to get there because I'm looking at an oral surgery coming up, and that's going to set me back a few days, unfortunately. So I apologize ahead of time for that. In the meantime, let's start by looking at a biwheel of the two parties. In this biwheel, before we begin, I am putting the Democrats in the inside of the dial and the Republicans on the outside of the dial. We can swap them up at some point just to get another look, but it's not going to change a whole lot because when Uranus of the Republican chart conjuncts the Pluto of the Democrat chart, for instance. We're going to see that in a minute. It's going to happen in reciprocal charts. So just for educational purposes, we may look at that for house involvement. In other words, what house is that occurring in? Because in each chart it's going to be different. The first chart we're looking at, the inside is the Democrats, and they will have the ascendant and the midheaven placements where the Republican will be scattered around. And then in the second chart, I'm going to put the Republicans as the ascendant and midheaven and see if it changes things a little bit. I'm pretty sure it won't. So without further ado, let's get into these charts and see just how these parties reflect issues within each other party. So we're back at the bell, and we're looking at, first of all, as I pointed out, there is a Uranus of the Republicans. Remember, they're on the outside, and it will be conjuncting the Pluto of the Democratic chart. And in this particular case, what we're looking at is, believe it or not, strong mutual interests. Now, what's interesting about the chart, and look again where it occurs in the 12th house, which is actually where the sun falls of the Republican chart. Now remember that these charts are literally what I like to refer to as midheaven charts. So that they are not necessarily their true charts. They're just what they call the sun chart. Remember that the sun was on the midheaven when we last did this. So they're referred to as sun charts or midheaven charts in the Uranian system. So here we see not only is the sun somewhat close to the Democrats' Pluto, but that Uranus is right on it. It also means that the Republicans as a party, though it's about, I guess, 5 degrees, almost 6 degrees away, there is a conjunction, though not a strong one, between Uranus and the sun of the Republican Party, which indicates that they are people who enjoy upsetting apple carts. And one of the things that they enjoy is playing with the Pluto of the Democrats, which if you think about Pluto, it's transformation. So it's almost like it inhibits the growth a little bit of the Democrats, or it encourages it. Because I think that initially when the Republican Party came about, it was in a way to make those Democrats accountable. And it worked. The Democrats went from being a party that was a discriminating mess, discriminating against black people like there's no tomorrow, to a party that now represents the black people. And in part, that is because of the actions of the Republicans. So I do want to give credit where credit is due. The other aspect that I really thought was pretty interesting was that Pluto, we're going to find Pluto here at 2252, is very close to the Aries point. And it is, and we know this from our last charts, it is in the Aries point or the sun axis of the Republican Party. So it is a power play manipulation type of a situation. But it does encourage transformation, whether for good or ill. Now, let's be honest, some of the bad things that the Republicans have done, particularly lately, will engage those Republicans, sun axis, in transformation. In other words, they might be forced to transform due to some of their extreme behavior recently. So I thought that was really interesting when I looked at this, because that Pluto very close to the Aries point, is making a conjunction, though a couple degrees away, not an exact hit, but very, very close, to the Chiron of the Democrats. So their transformation then encourages what I want to refer to as turning points or healing aspects to the Democrats. So you see how they gel. They cause each other to become better, even if it takes a few missteps, like what's happening with the Republicans right now. Ultimately, it will be because of the Democratic Party that they have to look at themselves. So it's really interesting how they are making each other accountable. I thought that was wonderful. Another one that I looked at was Cupido of the, and I started with this on purpose. If you notice, we're all in the same area. Cupido here at 28 degrees of Aries is sitting right on the ascendant of the Democrats. Again, accountability. Here's a party, and Cupido does represent party, okay? It falls right in the ascendant of the Democrats. And I think it has been, as I said before, about the Democrats turning corners, moving on, and going maybe from the party of racism to the party of the minorities. Okay? You can thank the Republicans for that. It's really interesting how they play with each other. The other one I want to look at is the Apollon of the Republicans. So I'm going to go to the Saturn now of the Democrats. And here you see Apollon from the Republicans. Now they're both in retrogrades. And it's interesting to have a retrograde Saturn, by the way, because it means that the parental, the people above the Democrats, well, they're actually an original party. You know, they came, I believe it's from the Whigs. I don't remember. I knew that once, and I'd have to go look it up. But they migrated into this, and so there really wasn't anything standing before them, unlike the Republicans, who had the Democrats for I think 18 years before they started. Okay, and I think they're both evolved from other things, but I have to say that the Democrats kind of might have been one of the original parties, and maybe at least the core of them may have been the people that left England. But again, I can't say that because I'm not sure. I'm not a historian. Here, though, one of the interesting things about this Apollon on the Saturn is that in many ways, the Democrats are taxed by so many demands and issues resulting from the Republicans, but it also brings opportunities. So it's here we go again, where the demands, the business demands on the Saturn taxes this Saturn. It burdens it, if you will. But that just can sometimes make Saturn do what it's supposed to do. So it's not always a bad thing. I can tell you that I'm going to go back one because I didn't tell you what Pluto to Chiron meant. I told you that it caused a turning point for the Democrats, but I didn't explain that Pluto with Chiron is also the result of underhandedness. And I think that one of the things that the Democrats have to be mindful of with dealing with the Republicans is that the Republicans can be very underhanded. And I think we've recently seen but ironically, this is how the party was set up. So it's not just today's Republicans, although they may be worse than some of them in the past. Um, they're maybe catching up to the old Democrats, actually, with their behavior. The other thing I want to talk about is what represents politics in a chart? Okay, and in order for us to look at that, I am going to look at the dial. We still see the two together, okay? I want you to look, first of all, at this, which is only 30 minutes outside of the Aries point. Remember that the inside is the Democrats. And what it means is that the Democrats are in the sun axis via their politics. So they affect their strategies, their planning directly affects the Republicans. Well, it does. It's politics. There are two asteroids that we will look at for politics, and I have written them down. And so we're going to have to put them in, I believe, because they are, one was 28 Gemini. I know I memorized some of them, and this is where I get very crazy because my notes are so, here we go. Okay, so we have Pallas here at 701 for the Democrats. And I was right. It is 28 degrees of Gemini. So very, very, once again, 2 degrees away from that Aries point. So both of the Democrats, what I call political stances, because that's what Pallas is. Pallas is people pleasing. No one does it better than politicians. They say exactly what you want to hear. But politicians are known for their planning, their scheming, and their strategizing. So these asteroids are very, very important to both parties, okay? The Republicans they're the outer, they have a 5-degree fixed, it's 5 degrees Aquarius to be exact, 520 fixed, Pallas, while Minerva is at 17 Aries 25. I was going to say I thought it was closer. It is. It's right in here. So they have, that's where they stand. And one of the things that came up when I started to go back, and I'm going to do that now, I'm going to go back. I just wanted to go through that really quick, and we're going to come back to this. But what I wanted to really talk about was if you go to the Chronos, or go back to that palace. So let's go back to, well, we can find it either way. If we go to the Chronos, and this is why I hate working with so many different charts, because let me go back to the dial. I think it's going to be easier to see because everything's spread out. Okay, here's Chronos. All right. And actually, I believe it's right here. So it's not, it because of so many different points, it is hard to put them together. But there is a conjunction between the Chronos of one chart and the palace of the Democrats. So if we find, and this is where I have to go find everything, the Chronos, which they both have. Here's the Democrats' Chronos, by the way, is at 27 degrees of Aquarius. It's going to be interesting because there's going to be a little discomfort as we go through the Pluto return, though I think the Pluto return is going to affect everybody, and I'll get to that in a second. But it's really going to affect the Republicans pretty hard, I think. It is going to affect, see, the Democrats are going through it already. This is where, when things are on the exact degree, it means a lot. But by early 22, we are going to get the first hit of the Pluto return. And that's probably when I'm going to really talk about that. But the Pluto return is really, really important to this country. It's part of our accountability, I guess, for the last 250 years. So it'd be really interesting to see what that chart has to say. So I'm still working on this. We're looking for Palace, which is here. There it is. And they're both in Pisces. That's about 10 degrees. This, again, is in the Aries point, which makes it directly in their sun axis. But the Chronos is on the palace. And it's almost as though the leadership of, because Cronus, the leaders, the credibility, is really connected to the strategic planning of the Democrats. And it may be that the planning of the Democrats is based in countering a lot of their leaders, or their leaders go after the strategies of Democrats. Well, that's what I've been hearing for 4 years, actually. So I don't think that the last 4 years prior to President Biden, I think we really did hear a lot about how nice, they're too nice, they're, they're this, they're that, they're liberals, so there was always this kind of attack. And it does seem that that's a favored thing to do from Republicans to Democrat. I don't think it's a very good strategy. Ultimately, I'm thinking that might be part of things that have to change as we go into the new age, because I don't know that in the new age that's going to be as easy for them. Okay. That's just what I see. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about, there's a lot of stuff in here, and I really have to keep moving, is this, we see here, no, it's this one, this Republican Mars. And I already talked about how it's hitting, but actually I didn't. That was another video. I did this a couple times. The Mars energy of the Republicans, you see that right here, is a direct hit to health and well-being of Democrats. And one of the things I pointed out in the first video is that if there's a health crisis, which we're in right now, it is no shocker that we have a majority Democratic government. My feeling is, as long as there is COVID or COVID issues, and that might, now I know COVID's going to wind down early next year too, but it kind of leads us right into a Pluto factor, which is a money factor. Okay. And what's going to happen is that they're going to attack the health and well-being of the Democrats, because Democrats are very concerned with governance. And we've talked about this. Republicans are not, they're not a party that governs. It's just, they're here to make the accountability of the Democrats. And I know that sounds really funny, but that's really all they're here for. I don't understand, this big desire for them to be the governing party when they're not really a governing party. Here, we're going to attack and be aggressive with regards to the health and well-being that Republicans are dealing with. Now, let's look at this 7 degrees. Remember in that chart, I had talked about the south node. I have to make a correction. I've actually made a correction since, but I want to do it again. I had talked about that we were presently with Saturn in the skies going through a south node event. I said it was just the Democrats, but I lied. No, I didn't. I made a mistake. It's everybody in the Sibley chart of the United States. Right now, we are all being oppressed. That could be the virus. That could be a nonsensical government issue that's going on with the Republicans and their big lie. There's a lot of things that are or their lack of masks or their lack of mandates with regards to vaccination. These are direct hits on the health and well-being policies of the Democrats, which ironically is exactly in conjunct, which means causing discomfort to our south node. And the south node represents our past. So it's almost as though they're messing it up so that we really cannot go back to the past. And that's causing a level of anxiety right there. So I definitely, no biases here. That's really going on. And I don't think that anybody out there can say that I'm wrong on that. So with that said, we're also looking at the Mars-Hades connection. Okay, so that's about 4 or 5 degrees apart, but I am talking about a larger group of people, and I am talking about something that's hundreds of years old. Okay, it's at least 100 and some years old. So I'm going to go with that Hades Mars, and the reason why is if you apply that Hades to the Mars, you can see all the ugliness that is being done to the Democratic policies on health and well-being, and still being done as the Democrats are trying to create a new deal regarding our infrastructures and our health and well-being as a society of people to rebuild our economy. Bear that in mind. One of the other things that it's sadly affecting, although Mars not as much as Hades, but remember Hades is deterioration. Now, it could be research, but I sort of doubt it. But mostly it's degradation and even biases and prejudices, because that is what is represented by Hades. Okay? It's affecting the Sun and the Neptune. So we have this Sun-Neptune. Sun-Neptune is, I believe, that there's, again, the Democrats have been around a long time and they're such a large party, they're not going anywhere. Even with the divisions within the party, they are less splintered than the Republicans. That's due to the infiltration and hijacking that's gone on since the Reagan years, starting with the Reagan years, but since the Reagan years. So there's this Hades on it, this bring it down type of quality on the compassion of, because that's compassion, on their longevity, on their compassion, and on, it's like a way of deceiving too, like throw in a bunch of things that are not true. Hate. And now you sow doubt. Okay, it's beautiful. I had to show that. Okay, and I even put 15 degrees so I wouldn't lose it. The other one I want to look at is, now this one I didn't write this one well, this note. So I'm looking now at, and I really wish I would write stuff down because, here we go. All right, so we're looking over here at 12 degrees of Aries. One of the things I noticed about the Republican Party is it has Pluto, Jupiter, Uranus, the Sun, all in Aries, which means they are really ruled by Mars. Now, the Mars is in a good place, having a Mars in Capricorn is a strong place for it. That's why I always wonder, I think an astrologer made this up. But this is really one aggressive party. Okay, they are uh, viciously aggressive, because I'm going to go with that hate mark. Okay, they just, that's who they are. They're also war oriented, and I think that that's really true because they're always the first ones that want to go to war, and so they have something to do with the war machine. You know, we've heard about quote unquote the war machine. That is more of a Republican issue than it is a Democrat one. So here we are with this Jupiter. And, you know, Jupiter is interesting because, and I believe this is across the dial stuff, and I'm right. Okay, so we have 12 degrees, 51. And look over here. They're partners. In work, they're partners. Okay, and they are. And they are very seen in the environment because that's an ascendant, vertexual ascendant with this. So on the surface, they're technically partners. Okay. Now I did talk about how the sun has uh, has to do with partners and how that can be kind of a setback for the Dems. So I definitely wanted to point that out. The other thing I want to point out here is that, and I'll get to that, the Sibley chart, when I get to that, I have notes already on that. We do have, though, that for the Democrats, and I have to look for this again. This is why I should write this stuff down. Okay, so there's the Republican South node, which is ironically trying the ascendant of the, no, not, I'm sorry, not a trine. It's an inconjunct the ascendant, which means there's a discomfort there, okay? 28 degrees to 28 degrees is real interesting. The real inconjunct, too, to the descendant, to the receiving end of things. So, boy, there's so much here. I'm looking, okay, so that we can see that. We can also see here that the Republicans, which have a moon beside it, let's go find it. Blah, blah, blah. I should be able, okay, that's the here we go. There it is. Moon Poseidon, again, about 4 degrees away. And they didn't know about Poseidon back then. So that's a early 20th century, actually, item. And so basically, Poseidon Moon is, they have partners in getting the news out, okay? But that's also propaganda. It could be that they could be such an enlightened party, and I think that at times in history they have been. I just don't think presently they are because they are partners in propaganda to the people. In other words, their people are being fed propaganda on a regular basis. And what it does, okay, if I can now get there, is it affects directly, okay, the, first of all, Astrea, which means it's like unending. It's relentless to the Aquarius. There's no solution for it, Astrea. It's almost like the Democrats are looking in horror, but there's really not much that they can do with that Astrea there, okay? But what's really interesting is that it affects their own Adamitas, which means that it causes them to be stuck. They back themselves into a corner when they do this. And that's one of the reasons why you're not going to see too many Democrats do too much about it. I know that that's been a question of people. Why are the Democrats not doing anything? That's why. Okay. And the other thing is that it's so interesting because when you think about Adamitas Venus, you're thinking about compressing money, consolidating money, getting to the bottom of money matters. And that's actually in the Democrats' chart. It's interesting that the Democrats are always the ones that want to do the big deals, but actually they're the ones that can. So is it a surprise that Democrats are the ones that come up with the new deals in history and now? No, it's not. And when you look at this, you understand. Because when it comes to money, Democrats are very good at getting to the bottom of things. The Pisces, on the other hand, the Republicans have a Pisces, which is conjunct the Chronos, which is almost like the money is related to the leaders. And that's really interesting because that's where the money goes, which I think is really interesting when you see it in a chart. Because when I say that the Republicans are the party of money, and I said it last time and I'll say it again, especially with Duke on the moon, you got to be kidding me. This stuff you can't fake this. This is reality. I mean, this is what I mean by just the facts. Okay? I've got to keep moving. Now, I'm just making sure that I really have uh, I do want to point this one more. And that is that the Democrat South Node, okay, which is here at 1 degree of Taurus, 19 minutes, is actually still in with the South Node and Cupido. This is a concern for me with the Republicans, okay, because their party has the South Node right with it. It's like they're always stuck in the past. They're stuck in the past, and I think it's going to be detrimental to them. It's even detrimental to the moving on and the turning point. So you've got a Chiron white moon, okay, and then the South Node's in the middle. It's the midpoint. It also means that for good reasons, the North Node is also a midpoint. And it also means that the North Node could help the Republicans if they can let go of the past, if they can let go of doing things the way that they have done them. Now, it's interesting because they have been switching. They've been hijacked 2 or 3 times since the 80s, okay? Right to the Trumpers, okay? As a party, that's also South Node, but it's affecting the Democrats' ability as well. So I really needed to talk about that. Now I gotta move. So we're gonna move quickly into the dial. And here we're going to look at, I wanted to look at the Aries point, which is the Republicans. And then I want to look at we're going to be looking at how each of these parties are affecting each other via the asteroids. And you can see that you cannot see any asteroids on here, okay? And I'm just going to do this because I can, but we're going to move it through the Aries point. And you see our palace here, okay? This makes it kind of harder to read this, but look at this, okay? So look at these. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately, these are the midpoints more for the inner charts rather than the outer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to you for a minute, and we're going to go through, I hope quickly, the asteroids and how they each affect each other. So I'm back, and so I really want to get through this quick. I do have everything written down to make it even easier. So the first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to look at the notes here for the how the Democrats affected the Republicans. I'm going to do that one first because it's going to go faster. There's a little bit less. First of all, so as I look at the Democrats' asteroids in the Republican chart, what I get, because remember now, the Republicans is easy, it's the Aries point. I do get Minerva, so there is the politics going back and forth. Not as strong as the Democrats' politics would be in the Republican chart, but it's there. Crone is also there. So credibility is there. And it's serious because these are all together. Okay, so these three are making a connection to each other at the same time. And it's almost like they seriously strategize against our leader. So whoever the Democratic president is, that is going to be the source of where they're going to try to villainize. And it is villainized, by the way. They are very strategic and they do follow structures. Okay, the Democrats, okay, in the Republican chart, All right. They force the Republicans to be this way. There's also this hunter-prey concept, so that the Republicans then want to hunt out the Democrats. It's really interesting because you don't see this going both ways. But they have to brace themselves for a fall, particularly when it comes to health matters. How about that? There is a lot of concern in the Republican chart with regards to the Democrats and the ability to solve problems. Because I don't think that the Republican Party, though they have panacea in here, when it comes to dealing with the Democrats, they're going to put more action into solving problems, but that's retrograde. So I'm never quite sure if it's the problem they go to solve or if something they want to make themselves look better that they put down the Democrats. I'm not quite sure how that is. Hekete means that they are encouraged to listen to their guts when it comes to the house on the hill. There's a lot of intuition being used for that. And there's also a lot of concern, although I don't know how they sleep at night, so it's a whole other thing, about money. Because here we go. It's with the Republicans, there is a lot of concern about money. Also, it requires that they look within their gut for their own overindulgences. I'm going to put it just like that. It's Bacchus, which is drugs and alcohol, but it is about listening. In other words, they got problems within their own leadership, it looks like. And their attitude is to win and at all costs. And again, Hypatia shows up here, which is reminding us about health issues. You know, when it comes to health issues, again, that is not our party. It's truly not our party. So now, as I look at the Democrats, here we are, I'm going to look at what they have to say about the Republicans, okay? And honestly, it's not as much as you might think. First of all, they do apply a lot of pressure and they do incentivize and excite Democrats to move. Okay, they've evolved. They have encouraged the Democratic Party to evolve to what it is today. So that is not a bad thing in anybody's view. So as we move on through this, a couple of other things jump out at me. Endings are featured. Okay, so part of what the Republicans do or present to that Democratic Party is it makes them end things. It makes them come to realities about certain things, and it makes them end. And we can just look to racism as a huge factor in the Democratic Party that since the 20th century has been dealt with. And we can thank the Republicans for that. Although it's interesting now, they're prejudiced, but I think that's all part of a strategic thing. So as we move on, we have that when it comes to the Democrats dealing with Republicans, there is an acknowledgement that there are things in life that are necessary evils, things that we have to do that we really don't want to do, but we have to. That's another way of helping them evolve, by the way. It also refers to blame. There's always this concept of blame, especially Republicans to Democrats, but it makes the Democrats look at the blame game, the blame concept as well. So there's a factor there that's at play. So as I move on, and basically I'm looking at one of the things about the Democrats that the Republicans do cause them to be more aware of is the neighbors concept. And I think that would be Mexico, Canada, South America. You know, we're all neighbors. We're on this continent together. And so the Democrats have a concern there. So they're more likely to want interactions with their neighbors. The other factor here is that there's a real knowledge about education. The Democrats, because of the way they're affected by the Republicans, are very concerned with education and educational matters. And then it goes on, and I see here there is an attitude with the Democrats that they have an attitude, just do it. Just do it. Even if you think we're going to be the scapegoats, it doesn't matter. We got to take action. And that is encouraged because of the Republican Party. That's really not a bad thing, guys. I do think that the Democrats in general see the Republicans as villains. I think I alluded to that when I was talking with the Republican chart, but they really do. They also see them as an Achilles heel, that they're the weakness, but they can't do without them because it's the way the Democrats are set up. They need that other party. So maybe more than the Republicans. That's why the Republicans keep trying to uh, take over our democracy, because I think in the end they don't think they need two parties. The Democrats know they need two parties because the Democrats are about democracy. Democracy requires at least two parties. And I say it just like that. The other thing is that it's like the Democrats are really good at saving up information that they can use to their advantage and that will help them win. So it's basically how they operate. I think that was pretty interesting. I was unaware of that. The other thing is that to when it comes to the Republicans, to the Democrats, they do see this as a problem that will never be resolved because they need two parties. It's so interesting to look at two different parties where one party wants to oust the other because they don't care about democracy. But and I'm not saying all, because I don't think when they were established that was part of the deal. It's part of the evolution of how they've utilized their chart. And again, they've been infiltrated, South Node on Cupido. So I'm not blaming the originals in any way for that, nor am I blaming the what I call the true Republicans, which we still have out there, but unfortunately it's harder and harder for them to voice themselves. The other factor, and the very final factor that, and I've already talked about, is the fact that the politics of the Democrats or the politics of the Republicans rather, uh, vice versa. It just makes each of the parties very political with each other. They are political with each other. It's like they'll say to each other when they're in their meetings, "Oh, I'll say everything you want to hear." But no, they won't. Sure, they'll say it, but that doesn't mean anything because it's politics, right? So I want to now, I'm going to quickly go to the Sibley wheel, and we're going to very quickly get through these two and how they affect the Sibley chart. So I wanted to jump in here right to the dial because I saw how much time I've already eaten up. And this is the Sibley chart. And look about this change of government here. Uranus, Kronos. We keep changing. We keep changing. It's funny, when I was having lunch, a couple years ago, with a friend of mine from Germany, and I was very upset about the election at the time. And he said to me, "I don't know what you're so upset about. Your government always changes." Sure it does. There it is. The government is also supposed to take care of the people. And that's the Kronos to the Cirrus. And that was the idea when they set the Sibley chart up. Ironically, it is not a Republican concept. It is only a Democratic concept, but it was the concept when this country was put together. So the first thing I'm going to do with this is I'm going to look at the Sibley chart through the Republican eyes, which is really easy because of it being an Aries point. And it's interesting how the Sibley chart features that Uranus and that Kronos, and whoever did the Republican chart put the sun there. Okay. But what they weren't counting on is, what does that energy mean? And I will say that the last president that the Republicans put in there was a Uranus president. He was unpredictable. He was off doing his own thing. So everything you could say, he was about Uranus, whether it be positive or negative. He was revolutionary. He was a lot of things, but he was a representative of the Republicans. Ironically, prior to that, he had been a Democrat, but he could not have run and won as a Democrat. He could, however, do it as a Democrat. So I mean, as a Republican. So you see that? That's beauty. Okay. So we're looking at the Aries point, which ironically is beautifully already pretty much drawn out for us in these lines. Actually, it's right here. It's this one. Okay. So yeah, it's up near, and Chronos is not far, but it's out of it. It's not far out of it. So it's always wondering how many of these charts were done by astrologers. I'm always looking at them a little bit with suspicious eyes because they didn't just come about, they were set up. Okay, so in the Sibley chart, Bacchus is what conjoins the sun of the Republican chart, which is addictions or behavior that is related to addictions. This is entertainment purposes only, but let's be honest, there has been strong rumors about our last president's drug use. Okay? And honestly, considering his son's actions at the Republican National Party, I think he's not the only one that has a drug problem. So, that's ironically, that's in the chart, but it also makes me wonder what issues other Republican leaders have had or have. Now we think the easy stuff, drugs and alcohol, but believe me, Bacchus is any behavior that's addictive behavior. Okay, so some of these people who have been arrested for sex trafficking, for example, could fall into this as well. The other thing that showed up here, and I'm just going to bring up some of the, is Hecate, which is, that ability to use your intuition, but also it's the goddess of birth and death. And isn't it funny that Republicans have such strong views on those two subject matters in our country? So much so that they think they should set precedents. But again, we'll see if that ever happens. Adam Mead says that they're a very resistant group, the Republicans. They're very firm in where they stand. And then we go on to, that was fixed. Then we go on to, here we go, how they can be, Hephaestus shows up here. And that's a craftsman. But ironically, he was involved in what I call odd couples. So I think there is some strange pairings where people don't fit together real well within that Republican Party. And the other thing that runs with that is lies. So they're not even going to lie about it. The lies are huge in this. Okay, when I get to Democrats, they're guilty too, but there's lies for you. I just wanted to point that out. So as we move on, I get to go pretty far because there isn't a lot. We see that their dependency is on those that have a lot of money. And remember that we talked about that when I did the chart, but here I see it with the United States, whereas the real connection, the dependency, your dice, is with abundance. Okay? It's interesting how they're really connected to that, but yet the blue states make more money. This always baffles me when I see things like this, but I often wonder how much of the money they're siphoning from their own constituents with these kinds of things. So then I go on and I see here, Dalius is in, but it's not. But let me explain to you what Dalius is, because there's a strange midpoint here. That's people who tend to let the consequences of their actions, they're very clever, these people, but they let the consequences of their actions fall on other people. And I think the reason why I included it, because it is close enough, is because how many times in my lifetime have I had to watch the Democrats come in after the Republicans screwed things up and try to straighten things out again? Especially, here we go, with money. Okay? They are the party of business, and that's in there. But it's also this business that, here we go again. So it's also the sense that they always have to kind of shift all the time. Well, and that's how business works, because after a while, businesses run their course. And you might be I remember once when the beef industry ran this country. Well, that's not true anymore. Then the railroad ran the country. You see what I mean? So you always have to start over then. It also talks about how, again, um, there are some, because of the prior, they always go back to the past. This is a very past living party. And because of the prior, because of what was done prior, there are nasty things that they're seen as the villain, okay, or they see the villain. So they're really quick to pull out the villain and show it, but that's because they don't want you to see their villain. There's also gender bias, big time gender bias. They question the whole concept of every decision that's ever made. They question it, but they also question. I know this is really strange because there's a lot of women in the political party, but do they understand that the basis of their party is not about women? There's a gender bias going on in that party. The other thing is speaking out, using their body image. In other words, when they speak out, they're going to do it full body. They're going, okay, and they are a party that speaks out. But here's the thing: they don't understand what some of those repercussions will be from them speaking out. So as I move on, it talks about how they sow chaos, which is part of what they do through propaganda. All right. Now, propaganda is a little bit out, but they've got a couple of Poseidons. So we have to go with that. It's out a little bit, but the chaos, it tells you the reason why the chaos is in the axis. It also talks about their authority figures, okay, and how they're supposed to be the authority, and how they are this party, if you will, that's supposed to be the party of authority. I think that's just a guise they want to do, because I'll tell you what, they're never at peace with things. They just can't find themselves at peace with things, even when they have to compromise. There's a hard time with Requiem, and Requiem is running with the word not. They are also the party of not. They are also the party that likes to stir up when the rest of us are at peace. They are the ones that will come in and stir the pot with memories of things that have already happened. How about that? That was beautiful. So that's what we can say for them. That's the Republicans in the Sibley chart, okay? I'm going to now look at a different axis, because we have a 17-degree, 1729 to be exact. So let's find it right here. Up with Melopine. You know, it's interesting that the Democrats do take over every time things are really, really bad. It is the law of the land. It has been going on. It is in astrology. Okay, so I do want to say that. As we move on, and I'm going to look now at this. Okay, the Mentor, they don't have as many asteroids that show up, but Mentor does. They do believe in mentorship, which is why I think Biden actually had to work with those original bad Democrats in the very beginning of his career, because of mentorships. They do that, and they believe in that. Also, they come in there, they have to step up when things are bad. That is their job. And Apollonia shows up for them too in their axis, which means businesses. They really establish businesses when they're in there. The whole New Deal, they've done it before, they're doing it again. So creating jobs and businesses is a part of what they do. It's their vehicle, actually. But they too have Lie and Stockholm in the chart. They too tend to, at times, beat up the American people. And sometimes they're not completely honest about it. And I think that as much as I love universal health care, and I do love the Affordable Care Act, and I had at some point in my life taken advantage of that, that was done to us in a way that maybe they should have done it differently. And that is one of the things you can say about the Democrats, okay? They also, though, do put up with a lot of grievances, and they themselves can complain well. They have to deal with the Duke. We know what the Duke is. The Duke is the moon of the Republicans. It's the Republican people, okay, or the people with money. And they also have to deal with actors from other countries, because that is something, and we're going to find a lot more about that, that I do believe we're concerned about other countries, but from a different perspective. We're more, as Democrats, concerned with our neighbors. The Republican Party itself seems to have a lot of connection in foreign entity. Okay. We'll find that out. As a matter of fact, logic is really important to the Democrats, but they're also a party that can see destruction to reconstruct. They definitely will do that. Their viper is foreign money. Because when you put the money with the the viper to the Democratic Party, the thing they're going to try and fight is the viper, because they feel like when that money comes in here, they're always being held captive. In other words, they're stuck where they are, and they feel infiltrated. They also feel that they're constantly being put into a position where they're subservient intellectually. Though that's not true, they're not. They're also very, very bright people. But because they're not the money, or the money isn't there, they're always feeling that they have to take this intellectually subservient role. Now, that might not be a bad concept either if you consider that they are a governing party and that the people will get their say. So I thought in closing I would come to you. This is a little bit longer than I wanted, better than last time though. I'm getting better. I'd love to hear from you on this. I'd love to hear from anybody. I am a little biased. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I admit that. I admitted it on the first one. I come from a line of Irish immigrants who were Union men. And I'm very proud to say that my father was somebody who fought to get the black man in the Union. And I've seen that full circle in my lifetime, and it makes me so proud and so happy. So with that said, I am not a good person to talk about the Republican Party. However, I definitely, through this chart work and through what I've learned through my experience doing this for you, is that they're not necessarily set up as a bad party. I just concern myself that they're going to be able to survive what's coming up simply because of the South Node on Cupido and that being squared by the Pluto return, which will be a whole other chart by itself. Okay. The next ones I'm going to do, I'm going to put out together, which will probably be a short video on each one and age them and see how they've changed over the years through astrology. With that said, I want to thank you for watching this really long video. And if you would, subscribe if you're not already subscribing to me. But like, share, and most importantly, comment, because I love hearing from all of you. With that said, please be well. Take care of yourself. And as always, till we meet again, I wish you all only happy reading.